King's Highway there, we feel would still be considered travelling in the wilderness. This is the modern highway, which follows the route of the old highway across Wadi Mojib, and in the bottom of here there's an old Roman bridge which marks the site of the old road. As we did this journey, we were able to gather a number of insights as well, which have been useful. I'm going to share just a few of them with you. We don't have time to share more than that. But one of the things that Nephi mentions as they travel is the fact that his father dwells in a tent. And I had often wondered why he kept reminding us of this. One had wondered if it was a way of showing that his father was some wealthy sheikh, some tribal leader or whatever. But as I was travelling in a place called Al-Lajun, near the way of the wilderness, I came across this tent and thought, well, I'll take a photograph. And one of the things you have to know in Saudi Arabia when you take photos, it's a very quick way to get arrested. I wasn't sure what the rules were in Jordan. As I went to take a photograph of this tent, a woman came running out, shouting and screaming at me, and I thought, oh no, here we go again. And then her husband came out, and then she started shouting at him, and he ran in and got his gutra and his agal and put them on and came out and stood there as smartly as he could to pose for this photo, which is very unusual for us compared to Saudi. And as I walked past the tent, we began to talk a little bit in my kitchen Arabic and talk. As I walked past this tent, one of the things I couldn't help noticing was that everything he owned could have been wrapped up and put into just one of the boxes that I had on the back seat of my car. And this man, everything he owned wouldn't even have fitted on the seat of one of my cars. And I suddenly began to realise that as a Bedouin, this man was incredibly poor. And I think what Lehi is telling us here is that his father leaves his country estate, he leaves all of his wealth and lives as a poor man, and yet never do we hear him complaining about that. Laman and Lemuel certainly do, but at no point does Lehi complain about this sudden change in status. And this was one of those insights that came to me that was interesting, so I'm going to share that with you. Now, George's got a presentation.
Okay. Now, one of the strengths that Richard and I have, and it's not degrees in archaeology, was the fact that we've lived combined in Saudi Arabia for almost 30 years. And we've traveled approximately 75,000 miles doing this research. So instead of us just talking right now, what I'd like to do is take you from the local Aqaba, where the King's Highway ends in the way of the wilderness, at the northern tip of Aqaba, where the wilderness is supposed to have started in those days. I'm going to take you down to the Valley of Lemuel. We're going to take you there in video. Now, as Richard said, you cannot set up a tripod and full production. What you're going to see is made on a little Sony camera. But we're going to try to take you there.
The particular waste in which Lehi made his first camp is among the most uninviting deserts on earth. Detestable certainly describes the place. United States Geological Survey and Saudi Arabian Department of Water Resources concluded Saudi Arabia may be the world's largest country without any perennial rivers or streams. Where is the fertile valley of Lemuel in a land described as hell, and where is its river of flowing water in riverless Arabia?
I became determined to find Lehi's trail to the river of Lemuel. Let's start at the Gulf of Aqaba and use only the Book of Mormon as our guide.
Nephi's characteristics of the Valley of Lemuel. From what George had read in the Book of Mormon, he reasoned that the Valley of Lemuel must be a mountain canyon. Nephi wrote that the valley was in the borders, which meant the mountains. The Arabic word for mountain is Jebel, which conjugates in Hebrew as Jebel, which means the borders. The mountains in northwest Arabia are called the Hijaz, that literally means in English the barriers or borders. Nephi wrote that the valley was in the borders, meaning the valley was in the mountains. Since the Valley of Lemuel was in the mountains, it must have been a canyon. Second, we knew that the valley had a small stream flowing continually through it. Nephi indicated that it was a river of water. Dr. Nibley clarified for us what this meant. Dr. Nibley notes, the expression river of water is used only for small local streams. The river of Laman must have been a small local stream, no name known to Lehi. It cannot, therefore, have been an important stream, let alone one of the most remarkable on earth, or Lehi would have known about it. Third, the valley of Lemuel opened onto the fountain of the Red Sea. The footnote in the Book of Mormon suggests it was on the Gulf of Aqaba, which is in the Red Sea. Fourth, the valley of Lemuel was very fertile. Nephi wrote that they gathered many kinds of fruits and even grain. However, Saudi Ministry of Agriculture has classified all the lands near the shore of the Gulf of Aqaba as 0% arable due to poor soil and rocky conditions. What instructions did Nephi give us for finding the valley of Lemuel? He wrote that they traveled in the borders. If we replace the term borders with mountains, we read, and he came down by the mountains near the shore of the Red Sea, and he traveled in the wilderness in the mountains, which are near the Red Sea. Note that Nephi first wrote that they traveled by the mountains, and then in the mountains. The mountains they traveled in were the mountains near the Red Sea. Nephi indicates that the wilderness they traveled in had two mountain ranges, both near the Red Sea. Indeed, this is exactly what is found in Midian, where there is one mountain range near the Red Sea and one near the Red Sea, with mountains ascending to over 6,000 feet. The valley of Lemuel was in the mountains near the Red Sea. Finally, Nephi wrote that they arrived at the river after traveling 3 days in the wilderness. In biblical times, the land known as the wilderness started near what is today the port of Aqaba at the northern end of the Gulf of Aqaba. Lehi could only have traveled in Arabia with tents and provisions if he had camels. A camel can travel between 20 and 25 miles per day, depending on load and terrain. This meant that their campsite by the river must have been somewhere between 60 and 75 miles from the northern end of the Gulf of Aqaba, and somewhere in the shoreline mountains. Does the trail Nephi described lead to a canyon with a stream? We were ready. The next morning we would follow Nephi's directions and see where they led us. As we traveled into Arabia, we found the terrain just as Nephi had described it, that they came down by the borders near the shore of the Red Sea. On our right were the waters of the Gulf of Aqaba of the Red Sea. Before us, excellent terrain for camels to travel, and on our immediate left were mountains. Nephi's initial instructions worked for about 45 miles. Then the passage along the shoreline ended. Here the mountains fall directly into the Red Sea. So what did Nephi say they did next? They traveled in the borders or mountains. We were not surprised then that the only wadi or valley into these mountains was found within a mile of where the mountains reached the sea. If we were on Lehi's trail, the prophet would have had only one choice, to enter this valley. But did this wadi lead to a river? We needed to see where this valley led, if anywhere. We were anxious on entering the wadi. If it failed any of our tests, it could not have been the one used by Lehi to reach the valley of Lemuel. First, it had to lead somewhere, either to a river or to another passage through the mountains. If it dead-ended, like most wadis do in this area, it meant that Nephi's instructions did not apply to this area. Second, we knew that the maximum distance Lehi could have traveled in 3 days was approximately 75 miles. This is only true provided they crossed good terrain for camels. If the terrain turned rocky or the trail led over mountaintops,